"Go hide, nurse." The shout tore through the freezing rain just as another burst of gunfire cracked across the canyon walls. Petty Officer Mason Reed dropped behind a shattered concrete barrier and scanned the ridge line through the darkness. Somewhere above them, hidden among the black rocks overlooking the valley road, enemy shooters had locked down the entire Marine convoy. Nobody could move without drawing fire. Engines burned beside overturned Humvees. Radios screamed over each other. Mud and rain covered everything. And in the middle of the chaos, Evelyn Carter limped through the battlefield carrying a medic bag nearly half her size. Her blonde hair was soaked against her face, and her left leg dragged slightly every time she stepped over debris toward another wounded Marine. She looked completely out of place among hardened SEAL operators and exhausted infantrymen. One of the younger SEALs grabbed her arm before she reached the next vehicle. "You deaf or something?" he snapped. "Get underground before you get yourself killed." Evelyn calmly pulled her arm free without looking at him. "He's losing blood," she said quietly, nodding toward a Marine pinned beside the truck. "If I don't get there now, he won't make it." The SEALs stared at her in disbelief. Around them, bullets slammed into concrete and metal with terrifying precision. Nobody lasted more than 3 seconds outside cover. Yet somehow this limping combat nurse kept moving through the open like she had done it 100 times before. Mason Reed noticed it immediately. Most people panicked under pressure. Their movements became frantic, sloppy, predictable, but not her. Evelyn moved low and controlled, eyes constantly scanning rooftops, windows, ridges, shadows. She never wasted motion, never hesitated. Even while kneeling beside wounded Marines, her attention kept drifting toward the mountain above them, like she was listening to something nobody else could hear. Another Marine yelled into the radio, "We need sniper support now." Static answered him. Their Overwatch team had gone silent 12 minutes earlier. Mason already knew why. Whoever was shooting at them had experience. Professional experience. The kind that waited patiently and fired only when it mattered. The convoy had walked straight into a kill zone. Rainwater rolled down Mason's neck as he checked the ridge again through his optic. Nothing. No movement. No muzzle flash. Just darkness and rock. Then Evelyn suddenly stopped wrapping a wounded Marine's shoulder and looked up toward the western cliffside. Her expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. "That's not random fire," she said softly. Mason turned toward her. "What?" Evelyn listened again as another distant crack echoed through the valley. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "2 shooters," she said. "Maybe 3. Elevated positions. About 1,300 yards out." One of the SEALs laughed harshly from behind cover. "Oh, great. The nurse is a tactical expert now." A few Marines chuckled nervously despite the gunfire. Evelyn ignored them and reached for another bandage. But Mason Reed kept staring at her, because 1,300 yards was almost exactly what he had estimated himself. Before he could ask another question, a single shot suddenly echoed across the canyon. The young SEAL beside Evelyn froze mid-sentence as the radio operator standing 20 feet behind him collapsed beside the Humvee antenna. Silence hit the convoy for half a second. Then panic exploded everywhere at once. And through all of it, Evelyn Carter slowly lifted her eyes toward the ridge line like she already knew exactly where the next shot would come from. The radio operator had barely hit the mud before every Marine in the convoy started talking at once. Commands collided with panic across the comms channel, while rain hammered the canyon floor hard enough to blur visibility. Mason Reed grabbed the fallen radio handset and pulled himself behind the disabled Humvee. "All units hold positions," he ordered. "Nobody breaks cover unless I say so." Another round cracked somewhere high above them, striking the road beside an abandoned transport truck. The enemy shooters were not rushing. That was what made it worse. They were patient, controlled, experienced enough to let fear do half the work. Mason looked toward Evelyn again. She had already moved beside the injured radio operator, checking his pulse with calm, steady hands while the rest of the convoy struggled to regain control. Her movements stayed precise despite the chaos around her. No shaking, no hesitation. Even her breathing remained measured. One of the younger Marines crouched beside her, barely older than 19. "Ma'am," he whispered nervously, "are we surrounded?" Evelyn tightened a bandage around the operator's shoulder and glanced toward the ridge line again before answering. "Not surrounded," she said quietly. "Contained." The word made Mason look up immediately. That was not the kind of language combat medics usually used under pressure. The younger SEAL from earlier overheard her and shook his head. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "Every time she talks, she sounds like she is giving a mission briefing." Another burst of fire echoed through the valley. Several Marines instinctively ducked lower behind the wrecked vehicles. Somewhere farther down the convoy, an engine suddenly died, leaving only rain, distant thunder, and the sharp echo of rifle fire bouncing through the canyon walls. Evelyn slowly rose to one knee, favoring her injured leg. Mason noticed the pain immediately. Her left boot dragged slightly every time she shifted position, yet she never complained once. Not even now. She studied the terrain again with narrowed eyes. "They are hurting us," she said. Mason frowned. "Explain." Evelyn pointed carefully toward the east ridge without exposing herself above cover. "Every shot forces movement west. They want the convoy compressed together." One Marine looked at her like she was insane. "Lady, you pulling this stuff out of a movie or something?" She ignored him completely. Instead, her eyes focused on a distant rock formation nearly 3/4 of a mile away. Rainwater rolled down her face as another shot echoed across the canyon. This time, Evelyn reacted before anyone else. "Down!" she shouted. Two Marines dropped instinctively beside her just before a bullet struck the side mirror of the transport truck above them. Silence followed for a split second. Then everybody stared at her. Mason Reed slowly lowered his rifle. "How did you know that was coming?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. Her attention stayed locked on the ridge. Listening, counting, measuring. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely louder than the rain. "Because he shifted positions after the last shot." Mason felt something cold settle in his stomach. Most trained operators would not catch movement patterns under weather conditions like this. Yet this limping combat nurse was tracking enemy firing rhythms like she had done it her entire life. Before Mason could question her further, a terrified voice suddenly exploded across the convoy radio. "Chief, we lost visual on the west ridge." Another Marine shouted seconds later. "Movement above us." Panic spread instantly through the trapped convoy. But Evelyn Carter remained completely still, eyes fixed on the darkness above them like she already knew exactly where death was waiting next. Rain continued pouring into the canyon hard enough to turn the dirt road into black mud beneath the convoy. Visibility kept dropping by the minute. Every few seconds, another distant crack echoed across the valley, forcing Marines lower behind damaged vehicles and concrete barriers. Nobody could identify the shooters. Nobody could even agree how many there were anymore. Fear was beginning to spread faster than the storm itself. Chief Mason Reed wiped rainwater from his optic and checked the western ridge again. Still nothing. Whoever was out there knew exactly how to disappear between shots. "We cannot stay pinned here," one Marine shouted through the radio. "Fuel truck is leaking, and we are boxed in on both sides." Mason keyed the handset. "Hold your positions." "For how long?" Another voice snapped back. Nobody answered. Because everybody already knew the truth. They were running out of options. Near the center of the convoy, Evelyn Carter tightened a fresh bandage around the injured radio operator before slowly rising back to her feet. Her left leg visibly trembled under her weight now. Even standing seemed painful, yet her eyes remained strangely focused. Calm. Analytical. Like she was studying a problem instead of surviving an ambush. The younger SEAL who had mocked her earlier glanced nervously toward the cliffs. "Chief," he said quietly, "what if they move closer?" Before Mason could answer, Evelyn spoke first. "They will not." The SEAL looked irritated immediately. "And how exactly do you know that?" Evelyn stared toward the ridge line another second before answering. "Because they already have elevation, concealment, and range advantage. Moving closer would increase risk." The Marine beside her shook his head. "This is insane. How does a medic talk like this?" Mason noticed something else then. Evelyn was unconsciously counting under her breath, barely audible beneath the rain. 16, 17, 18. Another distant rifle crack interrupted her. She instantly looked 200 yards farther south along the ridge. Mason followed her eyes, but saw only darkness. "What are you tracking?" he asked carefully. Evelyn hesitated for the first time all night. "Rotation timing," she said quietly. "They are alternating firing positions every 18 seconds. Silence spread around the nearby Marines. Even the younger SEAL stopped talking. Mason felt his stomach tighten again. Nobody without advanced sniper training would notice firing rotations under weather conditions like this, especially not while treating casualties in the middle of a live ambush. Another burst of static suddenly exploded through the convoy radio. "Chief, we lost Harris," someone yelled. He tried crossing to the second truck and got pinned behind the axle. Mason cursed under his breath. Harris was trapped nearly 40 yards from the nearest cover. Rainwater streamed across the exposed stretch of road between them. No one volunteered to move. No one even looked up anymore. The enemy shooters had complete control of the kill zone now. Evelyn slowly reached for a smoke grenade attached to a fallen Marine's vest. Mason immediately grabbed her wrist. "No." She looked at him calmly. "He will die out there. And so will you." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. Not fear. Frustration. "You are thinking like they want you to think," she said quietly. Mason narrowed his eyes. "Meaning?" Evelyn looked back toward the cliffs. "They are not hunting Marines anymore." Another shot echoed across the canyon. Dirt sprayed across the hood of the nearest truck. Evelyn never flinched. "They are waiting for someone specific to move." The younger SEAL stared at her. "Who?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. Instead, her eyes drifted toward the abandoned sniper rifle lying beside the body of the convoy's overwatch operator nearly 20 feet away. Then she said something that made the entire group fall silent. "The moment somebody touches that rifle." She paused softly as thunder rolled over the canyon. "This whole valley changes." Thunder rolled across the canyon as every pair of eyes shifted toward the abandoned sniper rifle lying in the mud beside the fallen overwatch operator. Rain collected along the weapon's barrel, while distant rifle cracks echoed from somewhere high above the valley. Nobody moved toward it. Nobody even spoke for several seconds. Chief Mason Reed kept staring at Evelyn Carter, trying to understand how a combat nurse knew more about the ambush than some trained operators around her. The younger SEAL finally broke the silence. "You keep talking like you have done this before." Evelyn lowered her eyes and reached for another medical pack without answering him. The silence only made the tension worse. Somewhere farther down the convoy, a Marine cried out for ammunition while another called for evacuation support that still was not coming. Their radios continued filling with static every few seconds. The storm was swallowing communications. Mason checked the sky briefly. No drones. No air support. No visibility above the canyon. They were alone. Another sharp crack snapped across the valley, and a round punched through the windshield of an abandoned transport truck 30 feet away. Instantly, several Marines ducked lower behind cover. One of them pointed nervously toward the ridge. "They are tightening the angle on us." Evelyn quietly shook her head. "No," she said. "They are adjusting for pressure change." The nearby Marines stared at her again. "Pressure change," one repeated. Evelyn nodded slightly while tightening the strap around her medic bag. "Storm pressure affects bullet drift at long range." The younger SEAL let out an irritated laugh. "Chief, seriously, who is this woman?" Mason did not answer, because he was wondering the exact same thing now. Evelyn slowly leaned against the damaged Humvee beside her, putting weight off her injured leg for the first time all night. The movement looked automatic, practiced, like pain was something she had learned to work around years ago. Another distant rifle report echoed through the rain. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, listening, counting again. Mason noticed it immediately. 15, 16. Then her eyes opened. "Move now," she said suddenly. 3 Marines instinctively shifted positions just before another shot struck the concrete barrier they had been hiding behind seconds earlier. Nobody laughed this time. Fear slowly changed into something else inside the convoy. Confusion. The younger SEAL looked at her differently now. "How are you predicting that?" Evelyn avoided his eyes completely. "Pattern recognition." Mason stepped closer to her despite the incoming fire. "That is not normal pattern recognition." Evelyn finally looked at him directly. Rainwater rolled down her face while distant thunder shook the canyon walls behind them. Her expression stayed calm, almost tired. "You ever notice how experienced shooters breathe before they fire?" Mason narrowed his eyes. "What?" "Everybody watches for muzzle flash," she said softly. "Nobody listens for breathing rhythm." The nearby Marines exchanged uneasy looks. She continued before anyone could interrupt. "The shooter on the west ridge exhales half a second before every trigger pull. He is disciplined, consistent, old-school training." Mason felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Nobody without elite sniper experience talked like that. Nobody. Another Marine crawled beside them carrying spare magazines. "Chief, Harris is still pinned out there." Mason looked toward the stranded Marine trapped behind the axle nearly 40 yards away. Rain hammered the exposed road between them. Any movement would draw immediate fire. Before Mason could respond, Evelyn slowly looked toward the sniper rifle again. Her eyes lingered on it this time. Not with fear, familiarity. Then she quietly asked a question that made the entire group freeze. "What was your Overwatch shooter using for Zero tonight?" Complete silence followed. Even the storm seemed quieter for a moment. The younger SEAL blinked slowly. "How the hell do you even know to ask that?" Evelyn never answered him. She just kept staring at the rifle while thunder rolled above the canyon, and somewhere high on the ridge, another unseen shooter prepared to fire again. Rainwater streamed off the destroyed convoy in silver sheets, while thunder rolled deeper across the canyon. Nobody spoke after Evelyn Carter asked about the sniper rifle's Zero setting. The question hung in the air heavier than the storm itself. Chief Mason Reed stared at her for several long seconds before finally answering. 800 yards. Evelyn nodded once. Not surprised. Not impressed. Just confirming information. The younger SEAL beside them looked back and forth between the two of them in disbelief. "Chief, why are we even entertaining this?" he snapped. "She is a medic." Before Mason could answer, another shot cracked across the canyon. A burst of sparks flew from the hood of a disabled Humvee barely 10 feet away. Instantly, every Marine ducked lower again. Evelyn did not. She stayed focused on the ridge line, eyes narrowing slightly, as if tracing invisible lines through the darkness. Then she quietly said, "Shooter shifted north. 20 yards higher." Mason looked through his optic immediately. At first he saw nothing except rain and jagged rock. Then suddenly he noticed it. A faint shadow moving between two elevated positions. So brief most people would have missed it completely. His pulse slowed. Not from fear anymore. From realization. Evelyn Carter was not guessing. She was reading the battlefield in real time. Another Marine crawled beside them, breathing hard. "Chief, Harris cannot hold much longer." Mason glanced toward the stranded Marine trapped behind the damaged axle. 40 yards might as well have been 400 under sniper fire. Nobody could cross that road alive without cover. The younger SEAL shook his head firmly. "We wait until air support arrives." "Air support cannot see through this storm," Mason replied. "Then we stay put." Evelyn finally looked toward him. "If you stay compressed together another 10 minutes, they will start walking rounds through the convoy one vehicle at a time." The younger SEAL scoffed immediately. "And let me guess, you know that because you used to be psychic?" Evelyn ignored the sarcasm completely. Instead, she slowly removed her wet gloves and flexed her fingers against the cold rain. Mason noticed something strange then. Tiny pale scars crossed her knuckles and the base of her thumb. Old scars. Repeated scars. The kind formed from years handling rough metal and recoil. Not medical equipment. Rifles. Another sharp crack echoed through the canyon. This time, Evelyn spoke before the impact even landed. "Left side mirror." Half a second later, the side mirror of the nearest truck shattered into the mud. Every Marine near her froze completely still. Nobody laughed anymore. The younger SEAL stared at her with visible unease now. "Chief," he whispered. Mason never answered him, because his attention was fixed on Evelyn's hands. Calm, steady, experienced. She slowly turned her eyes toward the abandoned sniper rifle again. Rain dripped from the weapon's scope, while thunder rumbled overhead. Finally, Mason asked the question sitting in everyone's mind. "Where did you learn this?" Evelyn stayed quiet for several seconds. The convoy around them filled with distant radio chatter and nervous breathing. Then she answered softly without taking her eyes off the ridge. "A long time ago." "Military?" Mason asked. Evelyn hesitated. Another rifle shot echoed across the canyon. This time her head tilted slightly as though measuring distance through sound alone. "Marine Sniper School uses different breathing discipline," she murmured quietly. "These shooters train somewhere else." The younger SEAL looked completely lost now. How would a combat nurse even know that? Evelyn finally reached for the sniper rifle lying in the mud beside the fallen Overwatch operator. The moment her fingers touched the weapon, something about her entire posture changed. Not dramatic, not sudden, just subtle, controlled, familiar, like somebody returning to a language they had not spoken in years. Then she whispered something so quietly only Mason Reed heard it. Please still be zeroed correctly. The cold rain soaked through Evelyn Carter's sleeves as she pulled the sniper rifle closer through the mud. Around her, the convoy remained frozen between panic and disbelief. Marines huddled behind ruined vehicles, while distant rifle cracks echoed from somewhere above the canyon walls. Nobody understood what was happening anymore. The combat nurse they had spent the last 20 minutes mocking now handled a long-range rifle, with the quiet familiarity of someone touching an old memory. Chief Mason Reed watched every movement carefully. Evelyn checked the bolt, inspected the scope, adjusted the cheek rest slightly with practiced precision. No wasted motion. No uncertainty. Her injured leg trembled beneath her as she lowered herself behind the rifle, but the moment her eye aligned with the optic, the shaking stopped completely. It was like watching an entirely different person emerge from underneath the medic uniform. The younger SEAL crouched beside Mason, whispering under his breath. No way. Evelyn ignored both of them. Her breathing slowed naturally as she studied the ridge through the scope. Rain tapped softly against the rifle barrel while thunder rolled above the valley. Then she spoke quietly. Shooter is using elevation shadow to mask movement. Mason narrowed his eyes. Can you see him? Not yet. Another shot echoed through the canyon. Instantly, Evelyn shifted the rifle several inches left. There. Mason followed her line of sight through his own optic, but still saw almost nothing. Just dark rock and rain. Then finally he caught it. A faint outline near the upper ridge. Barely visible. His pulse tightened. She had found the shooter faster than every trained operator in the convoy combined. Evelyn adjusted the rifle slightly again. Crosswind is pulling right 3 inches, she murmured softly to herself. The younger SEAL stared at her in disbelief. Chief, who is she? Mason never answered, because he was beginning to fear he already knew the answer. Evelyn exhaled. Slowly, calmly, completely unaffected by the chaos around her. Somewhere behind them, Marines continued shouting over damaged radios and wounded soldiers called for medics, but her world had narrowed into silence now. Scope. Wind, distance, timing. Rainwater dripped from her blonde hair onto the rifle stock as she settled deeper into position. Then suddenly another voice burst through the convoy radio. Movement on the upper ridge. Panic erupted instantly across the canyon again. Several Marines opened suppressive fire toward the cliffs, but Evelyn sharply raised one hand without taking her eye off the scope. Stop shooting. The authority in her voice stunned everyone into silence. Even Mason Reed felt it. Not arrogance. Command presence. The kind earned only through experience. Evelyn adjusted the rifle one final time. He is waiting for panic fire to expose your positions, she said quietly. Then she inhaled once. Slow. Controlled. The entire convoy seemed to hold its breath with her. A single shot echoed across the valley. Silence followed. Complete silence. For the first time all night, no return fire came from the western ridge. Marines slowly lifted their heads above cover. Confused. Waiting. Then a terrified voice suddenly exploded through an intercepted enemy radio frequency. Angel 6. Every SEAL near Mason froze instantly. The younger operator beside him went pale beneath the rain. Did he just say Angel 6? Another voice crackled through the static in broken English. Angel 6 is active. Move positions now. Mason slowly turned toward Evelyn Carter. But she was already working the bolt calmly, eyes still fixed through the optic as though she had not heard the name at all. The younger SEAL looked between them in disbelief. Chief, he whispered. Angel 6 was not even supposed to be real. Evelyn finally spoke without looking away from the scope. Her voice remained quiet, steady, almost tired. Most legends are just survivors people stopped understanding. The enemy fire stopped for almost 10 full seconds after the first shot. In the middle of the storm-covered canyon, that silence felt unnatural. Marines slowly lifted their heads from behind ruined vehicles while rain poured off shattered windshields and twisted metal. Nobody understood what had just happened except Chief Mason Reed. He kept staring at Evelyn Carter lying behind the sniper rifle with complete stillness in her eyes. She was no longer reacting to the battlefield around her. She was controlling it. Another burst of panicked radio chatter crackled across the intercepted enemy frequency. Voices shouted over each other in confusion. One phrase repeated again and again through the static. Angel 6. The younger SEAL beside Mason swallowed hard. I heard stories about that call sign in Coronado, he whispered. People said she cleared an entire mountain route during Kandahar. Evelyn ignored every word. Her breathing stayed slow and steady against the rifle stock as she tracked movement through the rain. Then suddenly she shifted the barrel several inches east. Second shooter relocating, she said calmly. Mason immediately scanned the upper ridge through his optic. This time he saw it too. A faint silhouette moving between rock shadows nearly 1,400 yards away. Evelyn adjusted for wind without hesitation. One smooth movement. One breath. Another single shot echoed through the valley. The distant movement vanished instantly. Across the convoy, Marines began staring at her openly now. Fear had transformed into something else. Oh, nobody mocked the limping nurse anymore. Another intercepted enemy transmission burst through the radio. Do not expose positions. She can see movement through rain. The younger SEAL blinked in disbelief. How are they more afraid than we are right now? Mason never answered. Because for the first time all night, he realized the shooters above them were no longer hunting Marines. They were trying to survive Evelyn Carter. Harris suddenly sprinted from behind the disabled Axel toward the convoy while the enemy ridge stayed silent. Marines pulled him behind cover as he gasped for breath. I thought I was dead out there, he whispered. Evelyn worked the rifle bolt again without emotion. You had a 4-second gap after the second shooter repositioned. Harris stared at her like he had seen a ghost. Thunder rolled across the canyon as the storm intensified. Visibility dropped even further. Most snipers would have lost effectiveness in conditions like this. Evelyn became more dangerous. Her eyes constantly tracked patterns hidden inside the rain itself. Tiny movements. Rhythm changes. Sound delays between rifle reports. She was reading the battlefield faster than anyone else could process it. Then another enemy shooter finally fired from somewhere high above the northern ridge. Before the sound fully echoed across the canyon, Evelyn had already shifted position. One precise shot answered through the storm. Silence followed again. A Marine near the fuel truck slowly lowered his rifle. This cannot be real, he muttered. Mason Reed felt the same thing. He had served beside elite operators his entire career, but what he was witnessing now did not feel normal. Evelyn was not simply skilled. She was operating several steps ahead of everyone else in the canyon. Another Marine crawled closer to Mason. Chief, he whispered nervously. How does a combat medic shoot like that? Before Mason could respond, Evelyn quietly spoke while still scanning through the optic. Because sometimes surviving long enough changes what people think you are. Her voice sounded distant, older somehow, like part of her mind was somewhere far from Syria tonight. Then suddenly she froze. Her expression sharpened instantly. Third shooter, she said quietly. Mason raised his optic again. Where? Evelyn adjusted the rifle slightly higher toward the eastern cliffside. Rain hammered against the canyon walls hard enough to blur visibility completely. Yet somehow she kept tracking something none of them could see. Then her voice dropped almost to a whisper. He finally figured out who I am. Rain crashed against the canyon hard enough to blur the entire ridgeline into shifting shadows. Marines stayed low behind ruined vehicles, while every eye remained fixed on Evelyn Carter. Nobody questioned her anymore. Nobody called her a nurse anymore. The battlefield had changed the moment the name Angel 6 crossed the enemy radio. Evelyn stayed perfectly still behind the rifle, her breathing steady. Despite the freezing rain soaking through her uniform, Chief Mason Reed watched her carefully. He had seen combat veterans crack under pressure before. He had seen elite operators lose composure when everything collapsed around them. But Evelyn looked calmer now than she had at any point earlier that night. Like the chaos finally made sense to her. Another distant rifle crack rolled through the canyon. This time it came from much farther east. Evelyn shifted the rifle instantly. He is testing angles, she said quietly. Mason scanned the eastern ridge through his optic, but saw nothing. Can you identify him? Evelyn stayed silent for a moment. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the scope as she studied the darkness. Then her expression changed slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Former military, she said softly. Very experienced. The younger SEAL beside Mason swallowed hard. Can he hit us from that distance? Evelyn answered without hesitation. Yes. Thunder shook the canyon walls again. Somewhere behind them, a wounded Marine groaned while medics worked beneath a damaged transport truck. The convoy still remained trapped, but something inside the Marines had shifted now. Panic was fading. Hope was replacing it. Because as long as Evelyn Carter remained behind that rifle, the enemy shooters no longer controlled the valley. Another shot suddenly echoed across the canyon. Dirt sprayed across the road beside the fuel truck. Before anyone could react, Evelyn adjusted 2 inches right and fired once through the rain. Silence answered her. The younger SEAL stared openly now. How are you doing that? Evelyn slowly worked the bolt again. He keeps favoring the same shoulder after repositioning. Mason looked at her sharply. You can see that through this storm? No. Evelyn replied quietly. I can predict it. The convoy fell silent again. Another intercepted enemy transmission crackled through the damaged radio nearby. This time the voice sounded nervous. Urgent. Do not engage directly. Angel 6 anticipates movement before visual confirmation. One Marine looked toward Evelyn in disbelief. They are scared of you. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. For the first time all night, something heavy crossed her expression. Not pride. Regret. Fear keeps people alive, she said softly. Then suddenly her body tensed again. She shifted the rifle sharply upward toward the eastern cliffside. Mason immediately noticed the difference. What is it? Evelyn exhaled slowly. The third shooter finally moved into position. Can you take him? She did not answer immediately. Rain hammered against the canyon while thunder rolled above them like distant artillery. Finally, Evelyn spoke in a much quieter voice. He trained with me. Mason felt cold settle in his chest. What? Evelyn kept her eye against the scope. Years ago. Another distant crack echoed through the valley. This time the shot landed close enough to shower sparks across the convoy's front vehicle. Marines ducked instinctively. Evelyn never moved. Her voice remained calm, almost emotionless. He knows my timing patterns. The younger SEAL looked completely lost now. Who is this guy? Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly against the rifle stock. For the first time since touching the weapon, Mason noticed pain in her eyes. Real pain. The kind buried for years. Then she quietly answered without looking away from the scope. The only sniper who ever survived hunting beside me. Silence spread through the convoy. Even the storm seemed quieter for one impossible second. Then Evelyn whispered something almost too soft to hear. And tonight, he finally found me again. The rain finally began to weaken over the canyon, but the battlefield remained silent except for distant thunder and the sound of water dripping from ruined vehicles. Nobody inside the convoy moved. Marines stayed low behind cover while Evelyn Carter kept her eye fixed against the rifle scope, tracking the eastern ridge where the final shooter remained hidden somewhere inside the storm. Chief Mason Reed watched her carefully now, not as a medic, not as a mystery, but as someone who had walked through hell long before this convoy ever entered the valley. Another intercepted radio transmission crackled through the damaged receiver beside them. The voice on the other end sounded calm this time. Controlled. Angel 6. The man said slowly through the static. You still breathe. Several Marines exchanged uneasy looks. Evelyn never reacted outwardly, but Mason noticed her fingers tighten slightly around the rifle stock. The enemy voice continued. After Kandahar, I thought the mountain buried you. The younger SEAL whispered under his breath. He knows her personally. Evelyn finally answered through the convoy radio without raising her voice. You should have stayed gone, Victor. Silence followed. Then the enemy sniper laughed softly through the static. Still correcting my breathing patterns? Evelyn adjusted the rifle half an inch higher. You still drop your shoulder before firing. Another long pause. Rain tapped quietly against metal around the convoy. Then Victor spoke again. You always were faster than me. The next rifle crack exploded across the canyon without warning. Sparks burst from the concrete barrier inches above Mason Reed's head. Before the echo fully rolled away, Evelyn fired once into the eastern ridge. Silence slammed across the valley again. Complete silence. No return shot followed. No movement. No radio chatter. Just rainwater dripping slowly through the canyon darkness. Evelyn stayed behind the scope another few seconds before finally lowering the rifle. Her shoulders sagged slightly for the first time all night. Not victory. Exhaustion. The younger SEAL stared at her in disbelief. Did you get him? Evelyn looked toward the eastern ridge one final time. He is leaving. Mason frowned. How do you know? A faint expression crossed her face. Almost sadness. Because he only stays where the odds favor him. As if on cue, distant rotor sounds suddenly echoed across the valley. Every Marine in the convoy looked upward immediately. Rescue helicopters emerged through the thinning storm clouds, their searchlights cutting across the canyon walls at last. Relief spread through the trapped convoy almost instantly. Men who had spent the last hour expecting death now slowly stood from behind cover. Medics rushed toward the wounded. Marines began securing vehicles and preparing extraction routes. Through all of it, Evelyn quietly pushed herself away from the rifle and tried standing on her injured leg. Pain hit her immediately. Mason reached out instinctively to steady her before she fell. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the younger SEAL who had mocked her earlier stepped forward slowly through the rain. He looked embarrassed now, smaller somehow. "Ma'am." He hesitated before continuing. "I told you to hide." Evelyn looked at him calmly. "You were trying to protect me." "No," he admitted quietly. "I was underestimating you." The Marine lowered his eyes in shame. Evelyn studied him for a second before handing the sniper rifle back toward him. "That mistake gets people killed," she said softly. "Do not make it twice." The helicopter lights swept across the canyon as Marines began boarding for extraction. One by one, exhausted soldiers glanced back toward Evelyn Carter with quiet respect none of them had shown earlier that night. No jokes, no disbelief, just silence. Chief Mason Reed walked beside her toward the evacuation zone while rainwater dripped from both their uniforms. "You saved 18 Marines tonight," he said quietly. Evelyn looked toward the fading storm over the mountains. "No," she answered softly. "Tonight they reminded me why I stayed alive." Then somewhere behind them, over the convoy radio one final time, a shaken voice whispered through the static. "Confirmed. Angel 6 active again."